The reflective planning session. The reflective planning session is a coaching tool that is a pre-conference. It exists for planning purposes. Its purpose is to sit down with the teacher and think through in a way that's even deeper and even more specific than perhaps the teacher has had a chance to think on his own or on her own. So the idea of a planning session is to always choose a lesson that's 3, 4, 5 days down the road. We don't want the teacher to have it perfectly planned yet. We don't want every T crossed and I dotted. We want a little wiggle room so that we can ask some very specific questions. First of all, what are your goals for this lesson? Listen very intently to what the teacher has to say. Seek clarification if you have to. What does understand look like? If you want students to actually calculate what would be right and what would be wrong. The second thing we'll ask teachers to do is consider their activities. How are you going to teach this? Will you have students sitting down or standing up? Will they be individuals? Will they be small groups? Don't expect the teacher to have it all figured out. We really want to think through that with them. What are all the possible activities? And then examine how congruent are each of those activities back to the coaching goal. Thirdly, we want to help a teacher think through his or her assessments. What would mastery look like? Think ahead. The students are doing exactly what you asked them to do, and you're thinking to yourself, this is going well. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are the students demonstrating that tell you as a teacher they are achieving mastery just as I hoped they would? In this coaching session, it's also a good idea to always end with some feedback. Was I helpful, you might ask as a coach? Did the process feel comfortable? Did we actually plow any new ground? Did I help you to see and think through some things that you might not have had a chance to see or think through on your own? That's the purpose of the reflective planning session. Catherine Griggs, thank you very much for participating in our coaching demonstration.
Thank you.
I know I've been at your school a few times and have worked with you in coaching before, and you're a little different this time. The last time I remember you were with child, and now you're not. So tell us about that.
My son is Jack is going to turn 1 in 1 week. So yes, a lot has changed.
Well, congratulations.
For me.
And he's your first one, right?
He is my first one.
So
yes, keeping me busy.
Harder than you thought, easier than you thought, the same as you thought?
It is. You know what? It's just always interesting. Some days easier, some days harder, but it's always interesting.
Well, I've got 4 teenagers at home, so
oh, wow.
call me up in a few years and I'll give you a few tips on what not to do. That's right. That's good. Well, it's good to be with you, and it's great to have you with us in this demonstration. Today, what we're going to do is a session called a reflective planning coaching session. And here's how that works. Here's the outline. We're going to think about a lesson that you still have in your mind that you're planning. You're going to teach it in, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, a week down the road. I don't want it to be too set yet. I want you to still have it moldable. And then I'm going to ask you some questions about your goals and your activities and your assessments. And the goal is that after about 10 minutes or so, you'll have had an opportunity to think maybe a little deeper and a little differently about this lesson than you could have thought of on your own. I mean, you'll think of it great on your own, but if I'm a good coach and I can be of value to you, I'll ask some questions that cause you to think about it in a little more specific way. And that's what we'll do. It's kind of like, you know, if you and I are salespeople and we're working for a company and you're getting ready to call on a big client, I might run through your questions with you ahead of time. Like, okay, now what are you going to say? How are you going to do that? What evidence are you going to show them? You know, as colleagues kind of working together to be sharp at what they're doing. Actually, almost every profession does this, but it's a little rare in education, but we're trying to make it less so.
Great.
Sound okay?
Sounds wonderful.
All right, great. Then let's start with goals. Then I think we were talking a little bit, and you're going to be teaching a unit on money.
Right.
And counting change specifically. So as you've been thinking about this upcoming money lesson, talk about what goals come to mind for you.
I want my children to come out of this whole unit being able to count change and being able to go to a store and make a purchase using the money that they have. And, in order to get there, however, there's so many prerequisites.
Right.
So we are going to be identifying coins, talking about their values, also comparing coins, and also working on just kind of honing in on our counting skills, counting by fives, counting by tens, and some of those different things. So those are all things that I'm hoping by the end that my children.
So I was just jotting down some things as you
Right.
said. You said what I want them to be able to do is to count change.
Right.
So when you say count, some of the things you mean by that verb count are, I wrote a couple down. First of all, to identify, right? This is a nickel, this is a dime, this is a penny, that's a quarter, right?
Right, absolutely.
And then you said value, so a nickel is worth 5 cents, like that. And then, gosh, what was the third thing you said? I wrote it right there, but I can't read my writing.
Comparing.
Compare, that's right.
Just knowing that, 5 pennies and a nickel.
Right.
And then also just visually, it's very difficult for first graders
Right.
because these coins look so similar. So
Identify them, compare. This one's
Comparing.
worth more than this one. This
Right.
one's worth twice as 2 of these are worth one of those.
Right.
That's what compare means. Great. And then your counting skills so that they can
Absolutely.
actually count change 5, 10, 15, 20, 21, 22, 23.
Right,
that kind of
right.
thing. Good.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's-
All right.
that's
That's
the
a
goal.
pretty clear goal. Count, meaning identify, compare value, compare the different types of coins and count by tens. Let's talk a little bit about how will you do that. So, okay, there's the goal. What activities do you have in mind? What are you going to have them do?
Well, I'm going to start off, of course, I need to figure out where they are because these children are coming in with different knowledge of money. Some children have allowance and get coins and they're fairly comfortable using money, and then there's some children that just really still know nothing other than the penny. So I'm going to have
First
to
grade,
kind of
right?
figure that out in
Yeah,
first
okay.
grade. But the one thing that in the years past has been pretty common among first graders is understanding that even though the dime is the smallest,
Right.
that it is worth more than the nickel. And so there's a great Shel Silverstein poem that I usually read at some point in the year, and I believe I'm going to use that to start off, where the little boy in the poem trades his $1 for 2 quarters, and he trades his 2 quarters for 3 dimes because he's associating
I see.
more being how many you have as a quantity as opposed to value. And so I'm going to start off by talking about that, and then
Okay.
get into maybe doing a little bit of observations of the coins, looking at them and talking about what they look like, going and hoping that then I have a better understanding of where they
Right.
are as far as
So the poem is an activity
Right.
that would help them accomplish the goal of knowing that coins are not valued according to their size.
absolutely.
So that would be a good congruent activity. Now, the part of valuing each, how much is this worth compared to how much is that worth? How might you get into that? What would you have them do?
I later on, as I'm progressing in the unit, one of the things that I try to do is build on one of their strengths, which is counting by fives. Most
Okay.
children come in and they're really proficient
They
in
can do
counting by
that.
fives. They did it in kindergarten, they do it on calendar. So one of the things that we do is we do something called Harry math, and I'm hoping to do a little more with it this year, where you tell them that the penny is bald-headed and the nickel has 1 hair and the dime has 2 hairs and the quarter has 5 hairs, and then that way they can count their coins always counting by fives, so they don't
Right.
have to go from 25 to 35 immediately. They just always stay in that counting by
Right.
fives system,
Okay.
just to make it a little more
Hairy
math.
math.
And it's also visual for them. I mean, they
Right.
can see the 5 hairs on the quarters. We draw them. We use a lot of stamps of coins,
Right.
so it looks
So the
real.
5 hairs on, I know you've got this, but run
Right.
it past me. The
I'll run it
5
by you.
hairs on the quarter
The 5 hairs on the quarter.
represent that's worth 5 nickels.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So we
5
just,
hairs.
right.
2 hairs on a dime, 5, 10, 1 hair.
On a nickel,
Nickel.
and then
Now,
the penny is
is
just a
bald.
bald-headed little baby. We always laugh at the penny, and
Yeah.
first graders, they get a kick out of it anytime
Right.
you use the word bald-headed.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, so that activity, I'm just kind of drawing a little graph here. Here's your goal.
Okay.
I want them to be able to count change.
Right.
Specifically, I want them to be able to identify coins, assign value, and compare one value to the next.
Right.
So the poem is congruent or aimed at that goal by establishing that it's not by size. The activity called Hairy Math is a way of using their counting by fives to value
Right.
the coins.
Right.
And it's also, that activity also helps them to compare, doesn't it? It
Absolutely.
kind of does both of those.
Absolutely. They do make the observations often that, this one has 5 hairs and this one has 1
Right.
hair, so 5 of these would be the same, and they're
Right.
able to make some of those observations
Okay.
and
Yeah.
associations.
What are some other activities, or what are some other things you're thinking about using?
I was thinking about setting up maybe like a school store where they actually have to come up with, I have a little basket full of just goodies, and they would have to come up with how much each thing would cost, and then maybe actually use coins to go and make purchases at the school store. So whether I haven't gotten fully through my
Right.
ideas, which is what I'm hoping you're going to help me do today, but maybe even each day as they do something in their math, do something well, they might earn a penny, and they
Right.
can trade it in for nickels once they get 5, and then go to the school store sort of towards the end.
Right.
And that would be a good way to kind of assess whether or not they're able to make their purchase at the school store
Right.
if they can count their coins and effectively buy it.
Very
So sort of where I'm going with it, but
Okay, well, and what I'm helping, hopefully,
Uh-huh.
with is, you've got a nice, clear goal. I
Yes.
want my students to count change.
Right.
And by count, you mean identify coins, you mean value each coin, and compare their value and note that it's not by size.
Right.
And so your poem is congruent to that. Your Hairy Math activity is a good match for that. Your school store is a way of practicing that
Right.
later on that seems to be congruent as well.
Right.
Are some others? I mean, that seems to have it covered, but are there some other things that you have in mind that you might do?
There's a lot of things that we'll do. Counting money is just going to require a lot of practice. So
Right.
obviously, when we count, we'll continue to use Hairy Math each time. We also play a game called the exchange game, where they can roll a dice and collect pennies, and then you would trade 5 pennies. When you get 5 pennies, you would trade for a nickel, and when you get 2 nickels, you would trade for a dime, and just kind of see how much. Just the more they can practice using that
Okay.
counting, the more proficient they'll be in the end.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about assessments.
Okay.
All right, so let's
Great.
fast forward.
Okay.
The lesson's going great. You're thinking to yourself, gosh, I wish I was observed because this is really going well.
Right.
And let's say you're in the Hairy Math part,
Okay.
where they have their hands in there, they're counting some things. Talk through exactly what you're going to be looking and listening for to tell yourself they're getting this just like I hoped that they would.
All right. Well, I want to make sure that when I'm watching them that they are putting the correct number of hairs on each coin,
Okay.
because obviously if they're putting 2 hairs on a quarter, we have a major problem here. So
Right.
that will let me know that they do know the value of the money. If they
Right.
put 5 on the quarter, then they know that a quarter is 25. So I'm going to be
Gotcha.
looking for that. And then also when they're counting, after they've put their hairs on and they're actually counting to come up with the total value of the money, I want to make sure that they are effectively counting by fives. Sometimes when they get to the penny
Right.
and they have to switch over to counting by ones, it can be kind of tricky. So I'm going
So
to be
you'd
looking.
give them a handful of coins.
Right.
Kind of going back to the activity.
Right.
Maybe there'd be a quarter, 2 dimes, a nickel, and 3 pennies.
Right.
And what you want them to do is tell you that equals
Right.
however much that equals.
Right, and I usually give them a marker so they can actually physically draw the little dots on for the hair so they can, see it, touch it. That's what our
So they're
children
kind of
do.
all doing this at the same time.
Right.
So there's a lot of money out there.
Right,
In the room. Do you use real money?
absolutely. I do. I use a combination because I use stamps because they're going to see it on paper on tests,
Right.
but also we use real money, play money, anything that they can find.
That they can
So,
count.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're counting. That goes back to your goal of counting change.
Right.
If they're able to do that, now, just a little added piece. Have you taught this before? You've taught for a few years.
I have. I've
Yeah.
taught this before. I have not done the school store element of
Really?
it, and the Hairy Math. I just
Yeah.
learned how to do that last year. So
I
I
was
haven't.
just going to ask, what's the hardest thing? Like, what is it that, so you're thinking for, okay, now it's really going well, but what's the one thing that you're pretty sure might not go well, just based on your experience?
Based on my experience, it's just there's so much nickel quarter confusion.
Really?
That
Those two.
that often that's probably the most difficult thing. And then, like I said, some of the children have a harder time switching from counting by fives to counting by
Right.
ones with the pennies. So that quarter throws in a whole nother thing for
So the
us.
quarter-
the quarter
the
is
nickel
probably,
quarter
nickel
is the
quarter
thing?
confusion is probably the
Really?
most difficult.
It sounds so official.
I know.
Nickel quarter
Yes,
confusion.
yes, it does. Very technical.
There's probably some theory there behind that. Oh, that's excellent. Good. So it sounds like it's going to be a great lesson. Hopefully, just taking a moment to talk through it has been beneficial to kind of get your plan even a little more settled than it was. So let me get a little feedback from you.
Okay.
The process of sitting down with someone and talking in advance about an upcoming lesson, specifically about goals and activities and assessments, it's intended to not feel like an evaluation. It's intended to be more like just a good conversation. Give me some feedback on that. How did I do?
Great. I think you did great. It was,
Well,
you know what,
thanks.
it was nice kind of seeing you write down things, because then I was
Right.
able to see if everything was
Right.
aligned, if my goal was aligned to my assessment, and if my goal was aligned to my teaching
Right.
was aligned to my assessment. And we don't get the opportunity to really talk through this stuff. You know, you
Right.
sit down and you do your plan book, but
Right.
you don't get the opportunity
Well, that's
to
pretty
think through
observant
quite
because
so
that's
much.
exactly what I was doing. When I asked you about your goal, I wrote down exactly what you said, and then you went on and clarified it. By count, what I really mean is this. And then I said, here's your goal, and every activity that you talked about, I drew an arrow basically that says, yep, that's congruent, that's congruent. Remember that a congruent activity is one that's an exact match. So it's not just in the neighborhood.
Right.
You know, so listening to the song "Money, Money, Money" would be in the neighborhood, but it wouldn't be a
Right.
congruent activity to actually doing like the Harry Math
Okay.
is a congruent activity, right?
Right.
So we did that, and then as we talked through your assessments and identified what are some things to look for those nickel quarter confusions, that sort of thing.
Yes, thank you.
Well, it looks like it's going to be a great lesson, and
thank you very
I'd like to
much.
come in and if I can't see this one, then see the next
Oh,
one. as
absolutely.
well.
We'd love to have you.
Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thanks.